All right, we are tackling artificial empathy today, and let me tell you, chapter 1 is already blowing my mind. It's saying that computation, it isn't just something we use, it's like the underlying code of everything, like the universe itself.
It is a fascinating premise, isn't it? The book argues that even the laws of physics, they're a form of computation with these really simple rules, but they're creating all of this incredible complexity that we see everywhere around us.
It's not just about computers then, it's about how the universe is organized and functions at a basic level. I think what really struck me was the concept of generative models. It's not just that they're describing the universe. It's like the universe is generating itself step by step, going all the way back to the Big Bang.
Exactly, yeah. There's this cosmic program that's just unfolding. And to understand how all of that works, the chapter points to these recurring patterns, modularity, self-reference, and co-duality. And you see them showing up everywhere, from galaxies to our own brains.
Okay, modularity. That one clicked for me, like building complex things from simpler parts. I'm picturing Legos, but on a universal scale.
And the chapter has some amazing examples. Think about atoms, right? Combining to form molecules. And then those molecules, they go on to form these incredibly complex structures like us. It's happening at every level of organization.
But it can't just be about things snapping together, right? There's got to be something that keeps things distinct, too.
Absolutely. And the chapter calls those repulsive forces like magnets. They push each other apart. Imagine if there weren't anything keeping things separate. Like the universe would just be this giant homogeneous blob.
Okay, I did not need that visual.
Yeah.
So we have forces bringing things together, forces keeping them apart. But how does it all get going in the first place?
You need the right conditions, right? A kind of primordial soup where things can interact freely. The chapter uses the term fluidity, and it makes me picture like a bustling city, ideas bumping into each other, new combinations forming.
Ah, that makes sense. And wouldn't that lead to competition, too? The best combinations survive, evolve, and all that.
You're exactly right. The chapter talks about how both competition and cooperation are essential for building complexity. It's this constant push and pull, this tension that drives innovation in nature.
Fascinating. Okay, so modularity, it's this fundamental building block. But then there's co-duality. And honestly, that one's a bit fuzzy for me still.
Okay, think of it this way. The world, it's analog, right? It's continuous, it's flowing. But our brains and computers, too, they use digital signals, those discrete bits of information. Co-duality is about how those two systems, the digital and analog, how they interact, how they translate information back and forth.
Can you give me an example, one that doesn't make my head spin?
Sure, think about sheet music. The notes on the page, they're digital representations, they're symbols, but when they're played, it creates that continuous sound. Co-duality is like that. It's using those digital representations, but to capture and manipulate that analog information.
Okay, that one is starting to sink in, I think. But then, chapter 1, it throws in this whole other curveball, self-reference. That sounds like a headache waiting to happen.
It is a mind bender for sure. But the basic idea is that in a self-referential system, the parts and the whole, they're constantly influencing each other. It's like a loop. The output becomes the input, and then back again.
That's really hard to wrap my head around, honestly. Can you give me a more concrete example?
Think of a cell. It uses its DNA, which is part of the cell, to build and maintain itself. It's a system that's both the creator and the created.
Whoa. Okay, so it's not just building blocks. It's systems that can, in a sense, build themselves. That's wild.
And the chapter uses these ideas like modularity, co-duality, self-reference to build this incredible narrative that connects the Big Bang to the emergence of life, of intelligence.
We're not just talking computers here. We're talking in the fundamental forces that shape the universe and everything in it.
Exactly. And what's even more fascinating is that Chapter 1 uses this framework to try to understand the nature of subjective experience, like how we perceive the world, how we interact with it.
Okay, now that's something I definitely want to unpack further.
Yeah.
How does this computational framework, how does it explain our own inner world? I am hooked.
Get ready, because that's where things get really interesting. The chapter, it really dives into how these computational principles, especially co-duality, could be the key to understanding how we actually experience the world. It's our brains, they're these incredible biocomputers, taking in the analog world out there and then creating like digital representations of it inside.
So our senses are taking in all this raw data, like the sights, the sounds, the smells, and our brains are turning that into some kind of digital code. Is that what you're saying?
That's the idea. And that code, it's what lets us process all this information, form memories, make decisions, all the stuff that makes us who we are.
But if it's all just code at the end of the day, How do you explain the feeling of actually experiencing something? Like the redness of a sunset or the taste of chocolate. That doesn't feel like ones and zeros to me.
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? How do we go from code, like digital code, to subjective experience, the actual feeling? And the chapter, it doesn't say it has all the answers, but it does offer some interesting insights. Like it suggests that maybe, just maybe, our subjective experience comes from the interaction of those digital representations with the analog world. So it's this constant feedback loop between our internal model and the external environment.
Okay, so it's not the code by itself, it's how that code's always being like updated and refined by how we interact with the world.
Exactly. And this ties back to generative models, right? Our brains, they're not just passively receiving information, they're actively generating these models of the world. Like they're making predictions, they're testing those predictions, and they're constantly adjusting based on new input.
So it's like our brains are running these simulations of the world all the time. And those simulations are creating our subjective experience.
Yeah, it's a pretty powerful way to think about it. And the chapter's argument is that this process of generating models, it is fundamentally computational, even if we don't totally get all the details yet.
This is all mind-blowing stuff.
Yeah.
But I gotta ask, how does this relate to artificial empathy? It feels like we've gone down this rabbit hole of consciousness and the nature of reality.
It's all connected, I promise. See, the chapter suggests that to create artificial empathy, we need to build systems that can do what our brains do. They need to generate their own models of the world and of other minds, too.
So we can't just program a computer with a bunch of rules about emotions. It needs to be able to learn and adapt just like we do.
Exactly. It needs to be able to build models of other minds to try to understand their beliefs, desires, intentions, all based on their words, actions, expressions.
That sounds unbelievably complex. Like, how could we even program something to do all that?
That's where modularity comes back in. Remember how we were talking about building complex systems from simpler parts? The chapter suggests that we can do the same thing with artificial intelligence.
Okay, so instead of trying to build one big mind, we break it down into smaller, more manageable modules that can handle different aspects of cognition, like
Oh,
perception, language, memory, things like that.
exactly. And these modules, they can interact with each other, just like the different parts of the brain. And that creates a system that's way more flexible and adaptable.
Makes sense. But how do we get those modules to actually learn and generate those models on their own?
That's where the magic of machine learning comes in. We can design algorithms that let these modules learn from data, adjust their parameters, and refine their models over time. It's like we're giving them the tools to build their own understanding of the world.
So it's like we're training them, like you train a dog or teach a kid.
In a way, yeah. We're providing them with the data, the feedback, the environment they need to learn and grow. And the cool thing is, they can discover patterns and insights that we humans might not even think of.
That's both really exciting and a little bit scary, honestly. So we have modularity, machine learning.
Yeah.
What else do we need to actually create this artificial empathy?
Remember co-duality, that idea. We need to find a way to bridge the gap between that digital world of computers and the analog world, the world of human experience.
We're talking about how our brains do it, but how do we get machines to do the same thing?
That is a huge challenge. It might require a total rethink of how we design and build these AI systems, maybe incorporating analog components, or developing these hybrid systems that can combine the best of both worlds.
So it's like finding a way to give machines a feel for the world, not just a digital representation of it.
Yeah, exactly. And this is where things get really interesting, because we're starting to blur the lines between what we consider artificial and what we consider natural.
Whoa, that's a really deep thought. So by creating artificial empathy, we're not just building smarter machines, we're actually exploring what intelligence and experience even are at their core.
That's the beauty of it. And Chapter 1 does a fantastic job of laying out the foundation for that exploration. It asks those big questions head on, the philosophical implications of what it means to create artificial systems that can truly understand and share our world.
This is all incredibly thought-provoking, but I gotta admit, it's also a little daunting. Creating artificial empathy sounds like a massive undertaking.
It is a massive undertaking, absolutely, but it's also incredibly exciting. Chapter 1 makes a compelling case that it's not just a possibility, it's maybe like the next logical step in the evolution of intelligence itself.
Okay, I'm ready to hear more about that next step. What else does Chapter 1 tell us about this journey toward artificial empathy?
Chapter 1, it talks about these jumps to universality moments in history where like new technologies emerged, but they weren't just tools. They were like whole new platforms for how we understand, even shape reality.
Yeah, I remember that from the book, like the invention of language or the development of computers, right? But what is it about these jumps that make them so important, so different?
The chapter, it points to a few things, some key factors. So first, these universal technologies, they tend to be digital, which means they use these discrete units of information, and they can be copied and transmitted really accurately with high fidelity.
So it's like the difference between sharing a digital photo versus trying to describe a scene to someone with words. Like that digital version, it's a perfect copy. But the verbal description, there's a lot of interpretation. You can lose details.
Exactly. And that ability to just replicate information perfectly, it's crucial for these jumps because it allows for like rapid spread of ideas and recombination of ideas. It's like the difference between a single cell replicating itself and a whole organism evolving over generations.
That makes sense. And I'm guessing reach is important too, right? Like the more people who have access to a technology, the more potential it has to spark innovation.
You got it. Universal technologies, they have this crazy reach because they can be applied to such a wide range of problems and contexts. Think about language. It allows us to communicate ideas across time and space. Or computers, they've totally revolutionized everything, really, from scientific research to art.
So it's not just about representing information. It's about creating tools that can be used to actually generate new knowledge, to solve new problems, to ultimately reshape the world.
Precisely. And the chapter argues that this ability to generate new knowledge, that is what defines intelligence, whether it's biological or artificial.
Okay, so digital representation, scalability, reach, these are all key factors in these jumps to universality. But how does this all connect back to artificial empathy?
If we want to create these artificial systems that can really understand and respond to the complexity of human experience, those systems, they need to be capable of making these kinds of jumps themselves.
So it's not enough to just program an AI with a set of rules for how to recognize emotions. It needs to be able to go beyond those rules to generate its own understanding of what those emotions mean, how they relate to each other, even how they shape human behavior.
Exactly. It needs to take in information from the world around it, form its own models of how things work, and then use those models to make predictions, generate new ideas, and then interact with the world in a way that actually means something.
This is starting to sound like something out of science fiction. But the chapter, it argues that it's not just possible, maybe it's even inevitable.
It's a very thought-provoking idea, right? The same forces that led to life and intelligence, those same forces are now at work in the development of artificial intelligence. And if we can harness them, who knows what incredible things might happen.
It's both exciting and scary to think about, to be honest. But Chapter 1 does a really good job of grounding these ideas in the principles of computation, showing how something as complex as empathy could actually be built from scratch, using the same building blocks that shape everything, the universe itself.
And that's what I find so fascinating about this book. It's not just about the technology. It's about really understanding the fundamentals, the nature of reality, of intelligence, even consciousness. And it's exploring the incredible potential of artificial empathy to actually make our lives richer, to expand our understanding of what it means to be human.
This deep dive has been truly mind-blowing. Chapter 1 of Artificial Empathy, it really challenged like all of our assumptions about the world and opened our eyes to this future where artificial empathy, it might not be a contradiction. It could be a reality, one that changes how we connect with each other and with the world around us.
It's definitely a future worth thinking about and a journey worth taking. And as we navigate this uncharted territory, I think Chapter 1 gives us this really valuable compass, guiding us toward a deeper understanding of ourselves, our technology, and the essence of what makes us human.
I don't know about you, but I am feeling really inspired to keep exploring all of these ideas